Hi, everyone. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk about the ways I like to work with 3D renders in Davinci Resolve. I'll cover a couple ways to set up proper color management to deal with our ACES EXRs, go over comping multi-layer renders in the Fusion page, and touch on scopes and color correcting, and go over the settings I like to use to export these to social media. This tutorial does assume you have a pretty basic knowledge of color management and ACES. If not, no worries. I have some links to some tutorials in the description that should get you up to speed. All right, let's hop into Resolve.
Okay, I've got Davinci Resolve opened here, and this is the studio version, so I paid for this, but the free version is great. And I would say if you've not used this, go ahead and download the free version. There's a link in the description of the video here. And, if you use it and you run into limitations, you could think about making the purchase. I think it's $295 as a one-time fee. That's for life. And you get Davinci Resolve Studio and the Fusion Studio version, which is here. I have that as well. Yeah. So basically, this program here has now been incorporated into Davinci Resolve under the tab here at the bottom. Right, so I prefer to work in the Davinci Resolve package rather than Fusion. So I'm going to go over my workflow for bringing renders in and editing them here and then outputting them. So first thing, if you're brand new to this or coming from Fusion, this is set up kind of like left to right. So media, this is where we bring in any media we're going to use, rendered footage, graphics, camera footage, whatever you're using. And then we have the cut and edit page where kind of the same thing happens, but different ways of editing your footage. I usually stay in the edit page. Then Fusion for comping and effects, the color page for color correction, Fairlight for audio editing, and then the deliver page for output. So in general, we work like left to right. So first thing, I'm going to just start to bring in some sample footage here and show you my workflow. So real quick here, I'm just going to bring in this EXR sequence that I rendered for my last tutorial. Right now you're seeing a sequence that goes from 0 to 240 frames, this EXR, and this is coming in as one item. And I believe frame display mode is where you're going to set that. If you put it into individual, you're going to see every single frame, and we would just bring in one frame. Like if we're going to pull these into our media pool, we're only bringing in frame 0 and frame 13. So in order to bring in the sequence, you can do frame display mode up here, click these three dots, and then set it to sequence. And now dragging this into the media pool, we've got the entire thing. We can preview the animation here. Okay, so I've just got some media in here. I'll go back to my media page. I've dragged these from my computer into the media pool. I'm going to head over to the edit page, and you may see something like this, a blank slate. In order to get something into our timeline, we need to click on the media pool here. Now we have options. This sort of exposes where we've brought in our footage. And before I do anything, though, what I want to do is kind of go over the project settings that are set right now. So I open this up and probably start with master settings. So right now, this is 1920 by 1080. And if I go down to color management, I have color science set to Davinci YRGB, timeline color space of ACEScct, and an output color space of Rec 709 2.4. What does this mean? So if I click on color science here, we see there's a few options. We've got Davinci YRGB and then Davinci YRGB color managed. We also have ACEScct and ACEScc. So Davinci YRGB is basically saying, don't color manage. That would be, if we wanted Davinci to be color managed, we would select this one. And that way, if I click on this, you can see it's asking how to process the colors in the output color space. If we select Davinci YRGB, we're saying, Davinci, don't do anything. I'm going to handle all of the color decisions myself through nodes. So just stay away. Don't do anything. Kind of the confusing thing here is like timeline color space. So what does that mean? If we select this, is it converting something to Rec 709? What's it doing? And what I found out was it's not doing really anything. The timeline color space in Davinci YRGB in this case isn't going to do anything to the footage you bring in. It's going to dictate how certain nodes and tools act. but it's not going to change our inherent color space of anything we bring into the timeline. So right now, output color space is set to same as timeline. Timeline color space is Rec 709 scene. This is, I don't know if this is a default, but you could have Rec 709 2.4, which is a very common output format. You may have it look like Rec 709 2.4 as the output color space, and the timeline space is the same thing, or you could have it set to ACEScct. All of these things aren't really going to matter too much in Davinci YRGB, because we're basically saying we're going to handle all of the color decisions ourselves. So I'm going to leave it like this for now, and I'm just going to hit save. Right. So the way I normally do this and the way I start a project is I'll render out some animatics, just viewport renders right from Cinema 4D, and I'll start to do a quick edit here in the timeline. So real quick, so if I was going to do that in this case, I've got, let me go back to the edit page here. Let me just show you this way. So I think my JPEGs here, so 2048 by 2048. Right, so if I drag this in here, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm just going to go 75%. So you can see here, I just took a 2048 by 2048 render and dropped it into my timeline. But you see here we have the black bars on the side. That's because our footage doesn't match our timeline resolution. So in order to make this work, what I'd want to do is just come over here to the settings and then go back up to master settings. And for timeline resolution, I can just go to custom and do 2048 by 2048 and hit save. And now, zoom out again, I can see this takes up the entire canvas. So what I would normally do here is just sort of put all of my animatic scenes in the timeline and do a quick edit. And just to get the pacing, make sure my camera angles are working and make sure that everything is how I expect it to look and I can make any changes before going to a final render. Okay, just for this example, let's say I'm happy with this cut of the animatics. So let's kind of chop this up and I like this. One of the things I also like to do is go up to the workspace here and do data burn-in. And that opens up a pop-up window here. And this is basically like time code. You could do like a time code here and just get an overall time code. And you can see here the time code starts at 01. I'm not even sure what this is. If I didn't want that, I can go up to the timeline here and right click on it and do timelines starting time code and just set that to 0. Hit OK. And we have this on running time code on the footage. But what I really like to do in this case is do source frame number here. And basically I get the source frame number of each clip. So if I'm shortening these, like, hey, this is too long, this goes over here, and like this is a little too long. Right now I know exactly what frames to render, and I'm not wasting time rendering extra frames if the animatic is already locked, like client approval, or hey, you've approved it yourself. You're not wasting time and money rendering extra frames. You've already got it here. So just keep track of that. And you can like change where these are and like how they sit, or, you know, the position of these things. If you want to like art direct these a little bit, you can just go in and, you know, change the size, whatever you like. And if you do find something that you like, a setting you like, you can actually save a preset, I believe here, save a new preset. So you can just come in and like add that on the next time you start Resolve, if you're doing an animatic, right? So in this case, I'm just going to go up and label this timeline animatic 01. So I've got that. So I've got like a rough animatic here. So I'm just going to turn off the data burn in here for a second. And I'm going to make a new timeline out of the actual renders of this and sort of get into how I would bring in 3D renders. So I'm just going to right click on one of these EXR sequences here and then just do create new timeline using selected clips. And I can just call this something, render 01. I can set the start time code if I like here, just at 0. And right now it says use project settings, but if I uncheck this, I have the option to change the format, and my actual render is only 1080 by 1080. So I can change that here, and 30 frames a second is correct. So you can have the options to make new timelines with different settings if you'd like. You just uncheck that and you come in and you can redo this if you'd like. All right, so I'm just going to hit create, and I'm going to zoom in on this. I have a Wacom tablet. I'm actually not sure what the, I believe just like the middle mouse button would work on this, but to zoom, I'm actually clicking and then doing the middle mouse button and clicking and dragging to zoom here. You can also come up and just do fit or hit Z on the keyboard to frame that up. So I'm going to pull in the other rendered sequences, my other EXRs. And if I want, I would use my Animatic as a reference for these, and then do the same edit here as I did in the other timeline. And right here, I can come up and go to Animatic 01, and now I have this timeline. If I turn data burn back on, data burn in, source frame number. So I have all this here, and source clip name, right? So I have like, okay, camera 1 is going from frame 30 to 177 is the first cut. There might be a way to like automatically like take this edit and, apply the same edit to this. That's over my head. If there's a way to do that, I don't know about it, but I could just do the same thing here, 30 to 177 it was. So I just make a cut here, and then now I have that same edit. So I would go in and kind of do the same deal. Okay, so I'm not going to really do that. I'm going to turn data burn back off. I did want to mention, although I don't know a way to automatically copy over and edit from one timeline to the next, there is a way to stack timelines to compare them. So if we go up here to this little icon and click on this, there's an option to toggle on tabbed timelines. So I'm going to click on that and click off. So now we have a tab up here. And if we go all the way over here to this little button, we can add another timeline at the bottom. So I can select Animatic and scroll through this timeline and compare it to this timeline up above. And if we just click on this, then these controls here can affect the zoom. So that's one way to go through and adjust your edit. I'm going to reset this and take a look at this. Now we're seeing the standard thing here where this looks incorrect. So it looks like we have a linear image that isn't really optimized for our display, because I did render this out in ACEScct. So it's a linear gamma EXR using ACEScct primaries. So now we need to get it back to the way we were viewing it in the Redshift render view, where we need to take our ACEScct and then do a transform into sRGB, the same way Redshift render view was doing automatically for us. So if we go over to the color page, we can do that there. So that's where I prefer to do it. The other option is into the Fusion page. So right now I'm bringing in these EXRs. So these are, I believe, just regular EXR, not a multi-layer EXR for this particular project. So later on, I will pull in a multi-layer EXR and we'll build it out using the Fusion page. But it's not necessary in this case. We can skip the Fusion now and just go to the color page in order to do color correcting and our ACES transform. And that's one of the reasons why I really like using Davinci Resolve rather than the standalone Fusion, is because in Davinci Resolve, we have this great node, ACES transform. So I've just dragged this out. So let me go back here. Let me just delete this and go back. So the color page here, we start with, so basically is like our input, this little green dot here, and our output. So anything we put in between here, we can make adjustments on. So if I do a search, I can just do ACES. So we pull up the ACES transform. I'm just going to click and drag this out to make a new node. And I can just drag this over this little line here until it turns yellow and let go. Oh, I didn't get it. There we go. Right. So in here, we have a very familiar looking setup here where we have input transform and output transform. Now, there are different options here for what version of ACES you can use. ACES 1.3 is fantastic. I recommend sticking with ACES 1.3 unless you have a very specific reason to pick something else. But ACES 1.3. Input transform, we know our render was rendered in ACEScct. So we can just go down and find that. ACEScct. And output, we can go to sRGB, which is what we had in Redshift, sRGB. And as soon as we do that, we can see here over on the left in our monitor, turn off the clips to make more room. So if I turn this off, I can hit Control D with this node selected, turns it off and on. So here's before with our just linear raw data, doing its best to be shown on our display. And now turning it on afterwards, this is what I saw in the Redshift render view. The ACES, the wide gamut, and the high dynamic range has been brought into something our monitor can display. Now we're looking at the sRGB output. So if you noticed here, I did this on this clip, right? So if I go to the other one, we go back and it's not looking so great. So I can do the same thing here on this clip, drag in an ACES transform, drop it in, same deal, ACEScct, sRGB. Now I could do that for every clip. I could go to clips, and if I did it on one, I could select a clip that has no extra nodes on it, and then middle mouse button on the one that does, and it will apply that. So I could do it kind of manually, click on the one that has it, and then click on the one before it. And now I've gone through all of these and added the same nodes. And this would work if I had like, I'm gonna hit Alt S here and make another node and another node. And then if I middle mouse button on that, when I have a new clip select, you can see it made all of the nodes here. So it just copies the grade. So that's one way you can go about doing this. Another way is to, up here, instead of clip, I can select timeline, and we have a new window here. And if you notice, this little dot change. So we go here, this is clip, and then this little dot here changes the timeline. So we go back to the clip section, and I'm just going to delete this and then select these and basically reset all of these back to where they were. So no ACES transform, and instead go to the timeline level, and I'm just going to hit Alt S to make a new serial node, and we can apply our ACES transform to this. Or I think you could just drag the ACES transform out and then wire these up yourself, either way, right? So I'm going to do that here instead. So I'm going to say ACEScgt, output transform sRGB. So I'm doing that on the timeline level. Now, if I go back to the clip level, nothing's there. But as we go through the timeline, every single clip has the same ACES transform on it because we're working as a group on the whole timeline. Since all of these shots are kind of in the same location, and I wanted to do a color grade on it, I could do that at the timeline level and start to set this up. And I want to make sure that I'm putting my nodes that I'm going to color grade on before the ACES transform, right? Because if I turn this off, I want to be color grading in this state, in the raw, high dynamic range, big gamut of ACEScgt, not in the tiny gamut and low dynamic range of sRGB, right? So if I add a serial node afterwards, that means any color grading I'm doing is happening after the transform. You can see I just take the offset up here. It's basically like exposure in this case, and that's going to clip things and make this look pretty ugly. If I hold on if I hold on E, I can take out this node and I can place it before. Now this exposure is still high, but you can see it's a very different look. Like we're sort of rolling off the highlights here. And this is sort of what we'd want or what we'd expect, right? So if I wanted to change contrast and do some color grading here, I can, whatever, just whatever you wanted to do. And that would apply to every clip on the timeline. Now it looks terrible, but get the idea. So basically we have some options here, but I kind of wanted to go over really quickly, just like basic color grading tools here in Davinci Resolve. And this is really the main reason why I'm choosing to work in this program rather than the standalone Fusion, because this color page is extremely powerful and you have access to professional color grading tools. And in Fusion, things are very limited. There's just the color correction node, which does sort of like a fraction of this stuff, but the ability to layer up these nodes and the way they interact with each other, I can show you some advantages of using this color page rather than just a single color correction node in Fusion. Right, so if we go back to the edit page, I'm going to pull in this ramp, and I'll just make a new timeline. This is just a linear ramp that I've rendered out of Cinema 4D as an EXR. So we go over to the color page we did before. Do the same thing. I'll go to the timeline, although it doesn't matter. There's only one clip here. So I'll just go and put this ACES transform. And before I do that, before I even set this up, I should take a look here at the scopes. I'm going to go back into the other render timeline. So look at this waveform scope here, and just giving us some readouts here. If you haven't used these scopes before, we've got like a parade, RGB channels here, waveform, vector scope, histogram, right? So you may be familiar with the histogram, like we're going from values, black values all the way to white values, and this sort of the distribution of pixels in these different value ranges, right? So we've got a lot of sort of dark midtones and fading off into the brighter highlights. So you can see this is sort of a layout, sort of a flattened view of our color space. It's got like red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, yellow. I might have let me show you the vector scope real quick, because this is super useful. Right, so I brought in my ACEScct color checker and just brought that into a timeline here, and then over in the color page, it just dropped an ACES transform from ACEScct to sRGB like we normally do. And here you can see this color chart here displayed in the vector scope. So each of these little squares has its position on this sort of graph. So if I go over to this node and just like start to increase the saturation, you can see these points extend out. These are the most saturated parts here, right? The further out you get, the more saturated. If I change the hue and I start to rotate this around, you can see them rotating around like 360 degrees. The same way we would get a hue rotation in a color picker, like in Redshift. That's what's happening here. You see these colors spin around. But this tells you how saturated your colors are. Anything in the center, if I take the saturation down, you can see they go all the way towards the middle until it's black and white. There's no color information. So we just get like a white dot right in the middle. Saturation back up, the higher the saturation, the further out from the center these dots go, right? So, back over to this render. Similarly in the waveform, we start down here at like black and we go up to white at the top. But this distribution is the actual scene here. So this is the left of the frame all the way to the right of the frame. Right, so as I play this, you can see this sort of dancing around. And we see these like bright areas here. And that corresponds to these sections here. This bright bubble highlight. So this is giving us some good information, right? But if we go back to the ramp, I'm going to click up here. You can see here, it's just a linear line, right? Because the left side of the frame is black, and then it's going up in luminance to white on this side. So I can click this little button here and pop this out, right? So this kind of gives us a good idea of like what's going on when we make changes. And I'm gonna make this a little bit smaller, but I'll show you here. So if I were to take my ACES transform now in the timeline color space and go from ACEScct to sRGB, and see what happens here. This gets much grayer, right? So if I turn this off, you can see here, we're getting pure white over on this side. This is all the way up to the top. With ACES on, this is now being tone mapped, and this is the tone mapping curve, right? So instead of like a 1-to-1 ratio, we're saying, hey, ACES, take these bright whites, or what used to be bright white, and they're mapped to like a gray. and it's sort of a soft transition. And so this is why, like, this gradient here is just a simple gradient. It's not glowing, it's not emitting light. And that's what's happening in our ACES transforms. So like if we had a scene that just had sort of some whites, there's sort of a common complaint like, oh, my renders look gray. It's like, yeah, because this section up here is reserved for like the sun. So that's where like you would clip a scene if you had you're rendering out like a camera pointed at the sun. It's super bright. And this is what I saw. This would be the look in Cinema 4D when I have this gradient pulled up, and I can show you. Yeah, so here's that scene in Cinema 4D. So I've just got a plane with a ramp connected right to the output. And under my display, color management, I'm saying sRGB and use the view transform ACES 1.0 SDR video. This is pretty standard, right? This is the way we'd work. So this is what we see. But if I take this, instead of the view transform set to ACES 1.0 SDR video and change it to raw, well, now we're getting what we saw here. And I don't know if you noticed this, but this ramp also changes down here in the ramp node. And take a look again. Our white isn't as bright as if we selected raw in our view transform, because the brightest whites in ACES tone mapping are reserved for overbrights, like an actual light. So make a new light and just set this to visible. So you can see now that's white because it's actually glowing. If I take this off and go back to raw, if you see this here, this pixel value here, it has a value of 21. This pixel value has a value of 0.99, so almost white. This is overbright. This is a area light. So I hope that makes sense. That's why, like, if you're seeing like, oh, why does my white become gray? Well, it's for that very reason. How do we get such a high dynamic range down to something our monitor can display? So like you need the brightness of the sun and like a piece of paper to both be displayed on a monitor. So we take something that would be like a white piece of paper here, and it's mapped down to a value of like here, like a lighter gray. So you can see this sort of tone curves. This is what the like ACES tone mapping is doing. It's pulling our whites down to like a gray. So I'm going to turn this off, and I kind of want to go through what these, let's put this here, what these tools do. So we've got some options under this section here. So we've got these here, primaries, color wheels. We've got lift, gamma, gain, and offset. We've got HDR palette here, where we've got high dynamic range control wheels. And these start here and then go all the way over. So we go from black through the shadows to light, highlight, specular, and global, right? So finer control. So I'm gonna go back to the primary wheels and just kind of go through these. So if I change the offset, you can see what it's doing to our image and to the scope here. So it's just sort of sliding this evenly up and down. And we can see that here because the black is just moving over to the left and the white is no longer white, it's gray. So that's offset. I'm gonna hit this little button here and reset it. And we can see what gain does. Gain is taking our brights up and down. So we're basically pivoting from our blacks and changing where our brightest white sits. It's either here and we're clipping like half or third all to white. So it's just flat, right? So I'll also go the other way and lower the brightest white down to like medium gray. So I'll reset that and do the gamma. You see the gamma is adjusting the midtones around the black and white points. So we're getting this sort of curve motion. It's just sort of shifting the midtones, but the brightest brights and the blacks are pinned. We reset that. And lift, the opposite of gain, right? So we're pivoting around the brightest white and we're taking the black point and changing that. We're clipping our blacks now here. This is all black. This is all black. Or I could raise it up and now the blackest blacks become some form of gray. Okay, I want to talk about contrast next. So take a look when I adjust the contrast here. We can see here the angle of our curve changes. So I pull this really far up. You can see here, all this is white now, and then all of this is black. We have a very tiny section of midtone data. As I hover over the image up here, you can see we get an indication on our scope of where that is. And I believe that's in the settings here. Display qualifier focus. I believe that's what that is. Yeah. So it's 3 dots, display qualifier focus, if you're not seeing that. So you can see where this is. So the contrast, if I take this all the way down, we get one tone, even gray. Now you'll notice where this is sitting. This is sitting in between 384 and 512. If I take this contrast back up a little bit, you see it's pivoting around that same point, and that's what the pivot is. So I move this, that is the pivot point. Let me take the contrast way up, and now cycle through, sort of scroll through the pivot. We're changing where that pivot is. Take the contrast all the way down and change the pivot. So you have a lot of control here with the contrast. It's just like we can take the contrast up, but then really say where we want those midtones to sit. And real quick, I want to show you. So right now we're just getting this still even linear approach, but there's a setting you may want to know about. Under general options, use S-curve for contrast. So I'm going to move this over and watch what happens if I click this on and hit save. So now instead of just a linear from black to white, we're getting this roll off on the top and bottom. So if I crank the contrast, you can see different effect here. We don't have the harsh line anymore in our highlights and shadows. This is rolling off, and we can change the pivot, and that's changing where this is rolling off. And if we go to the HDR palette here, we can take a look at how this section reacts differently than the primaries. So first I want to show you the global. If I take the exposure down, see what's happening here. We're no longer getting that sort of linear response like we did in the offset. And if I go up with the exposure, see sort of the inverse here. So we're like clipping the blacks when we raise the exposure, and when we decrease the exposure, we're lifting the blacks, right? So real quick, I'm just going to run through these. So the black exposure adjustment, I'll reset that. The dark, shadow, sort of moving up the curve here. Go to the light. So you see it's different behavior here at the top. We don't have like a roll off at the top. It's just a linear extension of the curve after the sort of midpoint. Highlight. Oops. Let me reset light. Reset highlight. Here's just the highlights. And specular. Right. So I want to go back to the global and take the, make sure I reset all these. There we go. Take the global back down. And I want to point something out here. I'm going to open up the media pool here and go to the ramp timeline settings. And this is sort of a gotcha. Once you go in and uncheck the use project settings, this, let me hit cancel here. These settings, these project settings are no longer affecting these timeline settings. You just have to be careful when you're using multiple timelines with different settings. Once you've uncoupled this from the project settings, this is where you need to go to make adjustments. And like I was saying before, the timeline color space doesn't have much of an effect, but it does have an effect in the HDR palette. It's one of like 4 different scenarios where the timeline color space, when you're using Davinci YRGB non-color managed, has an effect. So if I change this instead of ACEScct to ACES, which is a linear gamma, right? Because ACES 2065 is AP0 color primaries and linear gamma, right? So if I hit OK, you can see that same global exposure adjustment in the HDR section has a very different effect. And I'll kind of run through these. You can see, you reset that. We go back to the darks. You can see the difference. And the shadows. because this is now a linear gamma instead of the ACEScct. If I go back to the ACEScct, we're going to see that toe that's inherent in that gamma curve, right? The transfer function for ACEScct is a log function with a toe. So that's what we're seeing here. I'm going to reset that, go to the global. That's basically what we're getting here. A lift of the darks because of the toe of ACEScct. So just something to be aware of and think about. You don't really have to worry too much about this. Just know that it's one of the ways that the timeline color space can affect working in the HDR palette. Right, so just like kind of a basic overview, like really quick. And if you're interested in stuff like this and getting more into the tools of the color page and want to know more about color grading, I really recommend checking out Cullen Kelly's page on YouTube. He's got tons of tutorials on this. He's a pro colorist. He also does live streams where he answers questions from the community. And so I have learned a ton from Cullen, so I highly recommend this. Back to the render. So in this case, if I were going to do a quick grade on this, I'll kind of walk through really quickly like what I would do and how I would set this up. So since all of these shots are kind of the same, I will kind of stay in the timeline color space to get some general corrections done. And if I need to on a per clip basis, I can always go back and add some to the clip itself, right? So these clip adjustments happen before we get to the timeline. So I'm just going to hit Shift S 3 times and create 3 nodes here. And basically a pretty common setup would be exposure, contrast, and white balance or color, just as a really simple thing. So you'd probably start with something like your exposure. And in this case, so for exposure, I'd probably just come to the offset here and just sort of drag this down just to pull in the shadows a little bit. And I may want to take my gain down, sort of scroll through this and see maybe the gamma up a little bit, the lift, maybe take down, right? So that's feeling a little bit better. I can hit Control D, turn it off. I've got a little bit more contrast in there. But now for this node, I'm going to focus mainly on the contrast. I'm going to push this maybe kind of further than I think I would go and see where I want this to sit. So maybe, right, so let's say something like that. Like I have this pretty high. I can come back to the key output here, this section, and just drag this down. And it's kind of like the opacity, layer opacity in Photoshop. So I can take this down to nothing. This is what it was before, or I can slowly increase this and dial this in this way. So I can kind of overdo it here and then dial back the effect here, right? Let's say something like that. And then maybe on the color, I'm going to switch over to the vector scope here. And in the color here, we can see here, so we're getting a lot of like cool tones and a little bit of warmth here in the red, yellow region. This is sort of the cyan blue. If I take the offset here and start to move this around, you can see how I'm just sort of shifting these colors. So if I wanted to bring more warmth into it, I could sort of shift this up ever so slightly and make that sort of concrete a little warmer. Yeah, so like here's before, after. It's a subtle shift. You can kind of see this jumping a little bit more toward the warm area, and you can see the warmth in the concrete here. I don't know if I necessarily like that, but something to think about. And if I wanted to, let's say I just wanted the blue to be more vibrant, a couple ways I can do that. One of them, under the curves palette, I can go to hue versus sat, and I can just sort of drag around in here, and I get a point in the middle. And if I drag this up, I'm going to be increasing the saturation in just these tones. And sometimes it's good to just sort of extend these out a little bit more and get a little bit more room here. So you can see I'm pulling, as I pull this up, my saturation is getting closer to this cyan box here. You can take it all the way up. And if I turn this off, see before and after. It's way too much, but Yeah. And so if I go back to the waveform, you can kind of see here that my blacks are still, I'm not clipping anything. So I could, if I wanted to like maximize this, you see I have some white highlights here that are clipping, which is nice. But if I wanted to, maybe I'm going to take my lift down and make it a little moodier. Right, so just general stuff like that. I mean, there's tons of other things that can be done in the color page. It's just a super simple, quick example. But what I did want to do is run through using the Fusion page. I'm going to go back into the edit page, and I have my, where is it? Yeah, the interior shadow for the tutorial that I released previously. So I'm just going to do create new timeline using selected clips. Okay, so with this EXR sequence in the timeline, what I can do is go over to the Fusion page. And what I get is sort of the starting point with a media in node. I'm just going to zoom in. I'm going to hold my middle mouse button here and zoom in and like click and drag. And zoom out a little bit here. So we've got two views. And if I do media in, I can select this little dot here, and that puts the media in the left viewer. And you see here, little dot here, media in the right viewer. They're both the same thing, media in to media out. So in the standalone Fusion app, we don't really have media in. We have something called a loader. And if I hit Shift Tab, brings up this menu here. And if I start to write loader, we do have the same option. So I could come in here and add that same thing. And I click on the first dot, there's no change. This is the same thing as media in. I've just loaded it directly into Fusion. And the reason for that is I have a script called split EXR ultra. So this is a multi-layer EXR file. And so if I run this script, and just say run and close, what it's going to do is automatically pull out all of my render passes and split them up. So basically what this is doing for each of these, like let's go to caustics, right? And I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard. And if we go over here into the inspector, if you don't see it, just click on inspector, and we go to format, and under channels, you can see the red, green, and blue have been populated with caustics red, caustics green, and caustics blue. And if we go over to diffuse filter, channels, you can see diffuse filter. This has just been done automatically, right? So if I undo this and I took my input here and copied it, whoops. So if you have something selected and you paste, it's automatically going to create a merge node between them. So if you wanted to copy it, click off of it, paste it, you get a standalone if you didn't want to merge them together. Well, let's go to the second one. I can do this manually. I can go to channels, and then for red, green, and blue, I can just do, let's say I want the reflections. Yeah, I mean, that's just a nightmare to go in and do that manually each time. You'd have to do that for each pass. Yeah, no good, right? So the much better method is to download Reactor, and you can follow these instructions here. I'll have the link in the description below to this page, but basically this is sort of like a whole suite of plugins. Some of them, most of them free. Other ones are like suggested donations, but there's a ton of great Fusion plugins basically that are written by the community that are shared through this. The one that I'm using here is HOS Split EXR Ultra. So I'm just going to select that and run it again. Hit run and close. Right, so just going to zoom out a little bit and organize these. So I'm going to remove my media in to media out nodes and move this media out over here. And I'm just going to go through these and kind of move the ones over I don't need. This is the original one. I'll leave that up there for now. So right, so I'm going to start to composite these back together, and there are a few different ways to do that, and that's sort of the nice thing about Fusion and Davinci Resolve. There's multiple ways of doing the same thing. So what we need to do is, in general, add all of these together, and then we need to multiply transtint by these two. I'll put the overall formula for recombining AOVs up on the screen here so you can see. Feel free to screenshot this if you want. I'll also have this down in the description of the video if you want to copy and paste it somewhere. But what we can do, take our diffuse lighting. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit so we can see this. All right, so we want to add our diffuse lighting to our reflections. So we can do that with a channel Boolean if we want. So I'm going to actually delete that. And so if you have a node selected and come up here and hit channel Boolean, it will automatically connect it. Same thing if you have something selected and do Shift Tab and do channel Boolean, it'll automatically connect it. If nothing is selected and you drop a node in, it won't be connected. So some options there. So what we want to do is take the diffuse lighting and just drag it to the center of the node. It'll automatically put it into the background. That's the yellow triangle here. And we can take the reflection, drag it into the middle. It'll automatically assign it to the green triangle, which is the foreground. And in addition, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter which order these in. You know, this could go in the foreground, this could go in the background. It doesn't matter. But under the channel Boolean, we can come up here, and instead of operation copy, we want to do add. And if I click on 1, so we can do the reflections, diffuse lighting, and then both. We can see that's added on. So I want to show you something here, though, to watch out for. If I hover over the image, if we look down here at the bottom where the information is, but if you notice the alpha is set to 2.0. If I go back to diffuse lighting, the alpha is 1, reflections 1, and then channel Booleans, alpha is 2. So that's going to be a problem. We don't want to add the alphas together and get above 1 values for the alpha. So we need to change the alpha from alpha foreground to do nothing. And now the alpha is 1. So that's something to look out for there if you're using the channel Boolean. Copy and paste. Another channel Booleans with the same settings, drop it on and hit 1 on the keyboard. And we've added the refractions back in, right? So here's I just noticed, so there's difference here. This view LUT is on. There's a fusion view LUT. We want that off. Right. Here's just diffuse lighting with reflections, and diffuse lighting with refractions. So the other thing we can do, instead of using a channel Boolean, we can use a merge node. So you drop this in, a merge node is automatically dropped down. So if you notice, I'm just gonna get rid of this. We can just focus on one view right now. So with this merge node, if I select this, you can see the subsurface scattering, because this is apply mode normal and we haven't changed any settings. So the subsurface layer is just on top. So if we want to go to add, we go to our merge node, we see our apply mode is set to normal. We can scroll down here. We have apply modes or blending modes if you're coming from Photoshop or After Effects, but there's no add. If you play around with these sliders, you see, like, if you do burn in, looks like that's what we want. So that's sort of adding it on top. But if you notice here, the alpha down at the bottom is set to 2 again. So this isn't what we want. We just want to take the alpha gain down to 0. And now we're getting the same effect, but our alpha remains at 1. So with the merge node, the add function would be just taking the alpha gain to 0. And we can just keep doing that process here with all of these. Okay, for the translucency, so what we need to do is, and we need to add translucency GI raw plus the lighting raw. So we need to add these two together. So same way as before, we'll just take alpha gain down to 0. And then we need to combine the result of that multiplied by the translucency tint. So in this case, we do have that mode available. So we set that to multiply. And now this, the result of this, is added. So here's before, here's after. And we can put that into media out. So right now we've been viewing this in its raw state. And there are some options here. Like we could use a view LUT on this that only affects our viewing of the image, that doesn't actually change what we're sending out to the color page. Because right now, if we go to the color page, this is going to be correct, right? Because we're exporting this in a ACEScct color space, right? And with linear gamma, but this isn't really ideal to view it this way. And, you know, we could go up and say OCIO color space view LUT, and then go to edit, and then select an OCIO config, and then set this up. But I actually prefer to do it a different way. If we hit Shift Tab and do ACES transform, we can put an ACES transform after the media out. And if I move this over to this viewport and do what we always do here and go to ACEScgt and output transform sRGB, we can view it here, but we're still sending the ACEScgt version out. We're not baking in the sRGB transform before we go to the color page. So real quick, alternatively, you know, I set this up where originally we pulled this EXR into the timeline. You don't have to do it that way. There's actually, under the effects, we can just do a search here and just do fusion. Oops, we have to just go into the main level here. There's an actual fusion composition effect. If we drag that on to the timeline, it's just a blank slate for us to hop into fusion. And here you can see there's no media in connection. So that's where we could just do a loader and do the same thing and run the script and separate this out. So the only thing you have to kind of watch out for is the length of this. You know, so like this comes in, it doesn't know what sort of footage you're bringing in, so you'd have to manually extend or trim this to your underlying fusion composition length. So back in Fusion, some of the things here that we can also do is take the original sRGB pass and our beauty pass. And if we look at these, the difference between these two is just the post effects. So if we combine these two and set the mode to difference, so after this, I can just add these back on. Just the alpha gain back down. And now I've put the post effects back onto my render. There is a difference. If you notice the reflection in the chair legs here between these two, there's some like clipping in the highlights. And I believe that has to do with like the clamping that happens in AOVs. If I wanted to get rid of that, what I could do is just copy this original sRGB and merge this back on, but only in this section. So we can do that with a mask. So there's before, there's after. So just sort of overlaid the little fix here at the end. The other thing I kind of showed in the other tutorial is, in this case, the caustics pass was a little bit noisy for me. Caustics are kind of tricky in general to clean up. You need a lot of photons in there to get a really clean pass. But in this case, we can do like per AOV noise reduction. So I'm using the studio version that comes with a noise reduction node. And we just change from this node to the after the noise reduction. And we'll just bring this up slightly and just zoom in a little bit more. So here's before, here's after, just cleaning up that noise. And that'll just help with the noise in the final image. And then if I go back to the color page, this is still the raw ACEScgt image. So I can do this, do an ACES transform here, and so there we go. This will play back pretty terribly. So this is a heavy scene. So we're doing a lot of adding of these EXRs. There's a lot of nodes that have to be processed here per frame. So what you can do is in the edit page, if you right click on this, you can do render cache fusion output. This is currently set to auto. And if I go up to, playback, render cache is set to none. So if I set this to user, you see there's a red bar across the top, and I click on this, right click on this, and set this to on. This will start to turn blue over time. Take a little break, let this cache. But I want to point out something here. So right now this is looking pretty good. Got some nice tones here. But if I go back, I go to the color page, and let's say I take this offset up. You can kind of see it already. Do you see this? How this now looks kind of clipped? But this isn't so nice. If I go back here, it looks okay. But where it's cached, see if you notice this, it's clipped. That looks awful. If I go back to where it's not cached, check out the scopes down here, let it load. There we go. All that dynamic range is back, right? So what's happening here is, I'm going to turn this to off, so we're not doing this anymore. Go back to the settings, and in, master settings, optimize media and render cache. Right now, the render cache format is set to uncompressed 10-bit, but we want to change that to uncompressed 16-bit float HDR. Because what's happening is that wasn't a high dynamic range media that this was caching to. Now that would be fine for log footage or, footage from a camera that's not floating point. But for our renders that is floating point, we want to make sure this is set to 16-bit float. So now we hit save. And if I were to enable this, we'll let this cache a few frames here. I think the first frame is cached. Just zoom in. Yeah. Go to the color page. We're okay. So that's going to work out how we'd expect now. We can color grade without that sort of clipped high dynamic range. So this whole time I've sort of been operating in color management and just doing this manually. For this case, because I'm not actually caching this out, I'm going to go back to our other render, which is just the single channel. And I'm just going to do this. Well, let's do another one here. So I'm back at the clip level. And this is the timeline level where all of our edits are being done, but I'm gonna head back to the clip level, do something a little bit different here. And I'm going to add another ACES transform, and I'm gonna put it before this node. And I'm gonna say ACEScct. Instead of sRGB, I'm gonna say to ACEScct. So now this is in ACEScct. If I hop back up to the timeline, instead of the input being ACEScg, we've changed it to ACEScct. So we need to select ACEScct, and we're back to where we were before. But now this node here, things are going to be a little bit different. As I use the offset here, you can see it's behaving a little bit differently here. I'm not crushing the blacks as quickly, and I'm bringing the highlights down as well. If I go back, let me show you the other way. So I'm going to disable this, hit Control D, and go back to the ACES transform at the end. And now we're back in ACEScg, right? And the offset here, if we take a look, do you see how it's pulling down the shadows without moving the highlights? So you can pull this down, and it's like, you can see this is looking pretty crunchy. That's not really how I would expect this to work. So it's not ideal. So transforming first into a log color space may give you a more intuitive use of these tools, especially if you've color graded camera footage before. So we turn this back on and go back and change this to CCT now, right? So now this is more like an exposure, because now we're dropping everything down. You can see this sort of getting darker and darker, and we actually are decreasing the highlights as well. We go up, and this just kind of feels better. Like, I feel like this is more along the lines of the way I'd want to grade these images. And I can just pull these things down and, do adjustments this way. in ACEScct rather than the linear space that we were in. This sort of sandwich we're making here, right? We've got this ACES transform first, and then an ACES transform last. We're going from ACEScg into ACEScct into a log space to color grade. And we're doing some more color grading at the timeline level, just making some adjustments here, and then we're going from ACEScct to sRGB. So another way to do this is to instead change our color management to Davinci YRGB color managed. Now you could do ACES color management, but I don't prefer that. I won't go into the examples here because this tutorial will probably be like 3 days long, but I'm going to select Davinci YRGB color managed, and I'm going to turn off automatic color management. They're trying their best to like simplify this stuff, but I think it's just better to dive in and be specific. And color processing mode, going to change that to custom. And I'm also going to select use separate color space and gamma, right? So this is now the most specific we can possibly be in here. And we're going to say the input color space is ACEScg, because we're only, in this case, using our renders. Where is this? Oh, I move it around. Okay. So ACEScg is really ACES AP1, right? So ACEScg is the smaller gamut. ACES 2065 is the huge color gamut, and that's ACES AP0. Because we're using separate color space and separate gamma, we have to select these individually, right? So input color space AP1 and input color gamma is linear. Now our timeline color space where we want to work is going to be ACES AP1, but the gamma is going to be ACEScct. And timeline luminance, I'll just do custom and do 10,000. This is just sort of a weird thing. Like we don't want to limit the luminance. If we have a render that's like super bright, it's got super brights on it, we don't want to limit it when it's incoming. We only want it to be remapped outgoing. So we'll just set this to something super high, 10,000 nits. Now the output color space, Rec 709, Rec 709 gamma, could be, if we wanted to keep it consistent with what we've been working on, we could say sRGB, and I mean, basically sRGB, right? So basically right now, this is sort of this sandwich that we've made here. I can't click over, but you know, we're saying, hey, do all this stuff for us. And we only want to work in the meat of the sandwich, the bread on the outside being these ACES transforms, where we're going from ACEScg, AP1 linear, to ACEScct as our working space. And then when we're done, we're going to output sRGB. So right now, that's sort of what we've got. But we need to change this, though. We don't want Davinci to do anything else for us here. We're going to change that to none. No, that's not right. This wasn't working before, by the way, because originally I had set up this timeline to not use my project settings. So it has its own custom color settings that weren't being updated. Something to watch out for if you're changing your timeline settings individually. Changing your project settings may not update timelines that you're overriding project settings on. So I got you there. You're going to see all of these look corrected, even though I don't have any nodes. In my attempt to figure out what was going on here, I deleted all the nodes. And so now we have nothing in here, no grades or anything. So all of this conversion is being done behind the scenes. And if I add a new node here, let's go at the timeline level, just do Alt-S, and I change the offset. You can see here we're getting that same nice result as we did before, because now we're doing a working space of ACEScct. So now all of these controls will probably feel much more intuitive, and we're getting some nice roll-offs with all of our adjustments because we have that log space that we're converting to behind the scenes, right? For the most part, my preferred way of working has been to do Davinci YRGB color manage. I'm going to turn off automatic. I'm going to go through this again. I'm going to set this up and do custom. And the input color space is going to be we're going to use separate color space and gamma. We're going to be extra precise. Input color space is ACEScct, which is AP1 with linear gamma. We want the timeline working space to get our nice curves to be ACEScct, which is AP1. And the gamma ACEScct. Working luminance, we don't want to limit that here. We're just going to go 10,000 custom. Now, instead of output color space, I don't want to set that here because I like the option to choose where I'm going to be outputting this, and also the option to add a node after the output if I want to make any final corrections after the fact. So instead of output color space, I'm just going to do same as timeline, which means ACEScct. The other thing we need to change here is we want to set this to none, input DRT and output DRT to none, right? The rest of the stuff is fine, right? And so I'm going to hit save, and hopefully this is what you expected to see, because we're now saying the output is the same as our working space. So this is now a log ACEScct view, right? So now that means, get rid of that, get rid of this. At the timeline level, I can put an ACES transform from ACEScct to wherever I want to go. In this case, sRGB. And now we're back. And now we have our nice roll off here. And this is how we're able to do our grading in ACEScct. And we're automatically converting our ACEScg to ACEScct here in the project settings. Another benefit to using this setup that I have here, which, by the way, if you did like this and want to save it as a preset, you can hit these three little buttons up top and just do save current settings as preset, and you can enter a name there. I've already done that. That actually saves all the other options as well, like the S-curve and the uncompressed 16-bit float. So that's all saved. So I have a new timeline set up with this render, which may look familiar if you've seen my last ACES tutorial, where I illustrate the difference between selecting ACES primaries versus sRG primaries for your starting color. And I've just got a light on these that's increasing in intensity. So right now I've got that on the timeline along with this quick render here. And if I go to the clip area, I've got nothing going on each of the clips, but in the timeline level, I've got the ACEScct to sRGB transform being done. So in this case, like I illustrated in the ACES tutorial, we have an option here with ACES 1.3 for a gamut compression. And if I leave it right around here, we start to see the colors here shift from blue to purple. The gamut compression can be set to reference gamut compress, and as you can see, we get sort of nice desaturation and roll off to white with minimal shifting of the colors into different hues. So instead of going this off, the blue going to purple and the red going to orange, the compression handles that. I'm going to show another example here. I'm going to turn this off and zoom in, and a more subtle, probably more likely thing that can happen with something like dispersion set pretty high is that we can get out of gamut colors in our render pretty easily, and we may not even notice it at the time. I have my vector scope pulled up here, and this is with the gamut compression turned off, but I'm just going to extend this and make this bigger so you can see this. I don't know if you can see this in the screen recording, but you see this harsh line here? I'm going to go and hit Shift S and add another node before this and just crank the saturation. You can see here, this is what gamut clipping looks like. You see here, it's sort of like a flattened cube. So we're really pushing our colors here. I mean, this looks insane, but this is the result where we're pushing all these colors all the way to the extents of our gamut. But if I turn this off, or just delete this node actually, you can see it's still happening here up in the magenta section. So we're getting some clipping in our render without doing any adjustments. But with gamut compression on, we can turn that on here. You can see the border here has been pulled away. And so now, look at the image here, these super bright sort of like full-on magenta sections are being remapped to lighter purples and blues. And an even nicer option is the parametric gamut compression, where I've already set this up and sort of played with this, but you can see here different result still. If I go back between the two, we have the option to play with these sliders and make the adjustments however we want for each image. So this is, I believe, only accessible through this node. Another advantage of using this setup where we're not setting our output transform in the project settings is that I have the option to add a node after this transform here on the timeline, or come in at any time and update the output transform here at the node level to something like P3, for instance. I mean, it's not going to look correct on my monitor, but I have the option to change the output for this. Also, if I ever wanted to, some effect or a final color correction after the fact, I can put a node here and, you know, if I wanted to just like do a final little push, like, you know, for our ramp example, let's turn this on. So you can see here, here's our ramp, and it's being adjusted the way it should to be sRGB from ACEScct to sRGB. But if I make a node before, if I hit Shift S in this case, and I take the gain up, you can see I'm still not clipping to white. You take the offset up, that's not doing it. Gamma, that's not doing it, right? So I'm sort of stuck in this gray world here. And, you know, I could go back in and change my settings in Redshift to get that white if I want this to be white, or I could make a node after the fact, after the ACES transform, and just adjust this so that this is closer to white, or clipping if I wanted to. You know, if I want to clip it, I get to clip it. I decide. So just the ability to have that final level of control, like where it's going and what the final look is after the fact. So I'm not limited by the tone mapping of ACES. I can do it after. So that's why I prefer to have that set up that way. So we're saying that the output color space is same as timeline, which is ACEScct. And then we just go in and put an ACES transform at the end and decide where it's going. And if we need to add any final adjustments, make any final changes. Real quick here, I want to go over the deliver page. The way I've been delivering this, let's just say I'm like happy with this. I have not done anything on it, but I'm gonna just do a name here, whatever, test, set a location. And for export, I'm going to do MP4 and H.264 codec. And I want to make sure that I come down to advanced settings. And if I'm exporting this for YouTube or for Twitter, Instagram, like I'm rendering these things out and then posting it to socials, I want to make sure to change the color space tag here, because right now, same as project, this is another area where the timeline color space comes into play. That's what this means. Same as project is your timeline color space. And right now we're set to ACEScct. So this would tag this image as an ACEScct or log gamma file. That's incorrect. So for Instagram, I've been doing sRGB for the color space. And for the gamma, I've been doing gamma 2.2. Color space could be Rec 709. Rec 709 and sRGB have the exact same color primaries. The difference between them is the way they handle gamma. Rec 709 traditionally has a gamma 2.4. That's going to look a little bit more washed out than a gamma 2.2. sRGB has its own crazy gamma curve that isn't just a straight gamma number. It's its own thing. And I don't know a lot about this. I'm still learning about this. There seems to be quite a few debates happening online about the proper way to export files for viewing on other monitors. So if you're going to a reference monitor, you'd probably want to export this as Rec 709, Gamma 2.4, and maybe even do a color space transform in the timeline so that you're going from sRGB. So it'd be like on this page, I don't know this for sure, but potentially you'd want to go from sRGB if you were going to, this was going to be like a broadcast submission. This was going to be on TV or something. You may want to do a color space transform after this. Right, to go from sRGB to Rec 709 Gamut 2.4. And here's the difference, before, after. It's going to be different. So don't quote me on that. I'm still trying to get my head around these different sort of ways of exporting, but I believe for the internet general, sRGB Gamma 2.2 has worked for me. Some other things just to click if you are resizing anything. Force sizing to highest quality. Force debayer to highest quality would only be relevant if you had raw footage. If you were importing like actual raw camera footage like Blackmagic or Canon RAW, you'd want to just check that on just to make sure that you're getting the highest quality output. Then just set your file location and then add to render queue and just hit render all and you have an export.
Thanks so much, everyone. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer those as soon as I can. Just a heads up, I am still working on my Patreon. That is in the works. If you're interested in learning more about photography and incorporating that knowledge into 3D renders, definitely stay tuned here for updates. All right. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.